Danielle, Nellis. Welcome to the platform. How you doing?
Good. How are you, Jerome?
I'm doing good. I'm doing fine. But you got a lot of stuff going on right now that we're gonna get into. Your candidate for Davidson County District Attorney.
Yes.
That's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
I would say arguably maybe the most powerful position in our criminal legal system here in Davidson County. The district attorney is a powerful person. So we're gonna talk about power a little bit too, and how you plan to use it. But for those who might not know you, Danielle, can you give us a little bit of background about where you're from, just a little bit about who you are, and just the significant points of your legal track,
Sure.
for those who just may not know and
Just may not know.
haven't Googled you yet.
That's fair. That's fair. So my name is P. Danielle Nellis. I am a multi-generational Nashville native, and I count back 5, 6 or so, and it's actually more than that, but I stopped tracking after a while here in Nashville and Middle Tennessee. I'm the oldest of 4. I have one son and a wonderful husband who has supported me so much in this run. His name is Eric Insignares. My married name is Insignares. My family name is actually Odie, and so that's how people know my family.
Okay.
I went to Hume-Fogg for high school because, Nashville natives, that's what we
Right.
do, Jerome.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
like,
yeah.
so
What
where'd you
high
go to
s- yeah,
school?
what high school did
All
you go
those
to?
things.
Yeah.
So I went to Hume-Fogg, and I left there and went to Spelman, one of the best decisions of my life, eye-opening experience for me. And I was a presidential scholar there, so blessed to do that and play basketball. I went to Boston University for law school. It was cold in Boston, like it's cold today. It's like
Yeah.
20-some degrees outside today.
It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. I graduated on a Sunday, came home on a Monday. I graduated in 2009 when the bubble burst on the legal market. When you say 2009 to lawyers, we all cringe. We're like, ooh, that was a bad year. That was a bad year. But what it did was put me on a trajectory that I had not expected.
Right.
And so I came home, took the bar, and I started taking appointments, criminal appointments, and it changed my life. I realized that it's something that I thoroughly enjoyed, being in court, arguing on behalf of clients, negotiating. A lot of my work in law school was negotiations based, and so it was a natural fit. I really focused on holistically addressing the needs of my clients. Holistic defense, the phrase didn't really become popular until after I was no longer doing defense, but my thought was always, let's get to the root cause. Let's figure out how to not have repeat clients.
Right.
A lot of people's businesses are built on having repeat clients, but if I did my job, I wasn't going to see that person again. And I've loved to hear so many of the success stories. I went to the DA's office after that on the promise of progressive prosecution. I worked in domestic violence there for a good portion of it, also in criminal court and doing the felony docket in general sessions. Learned a lot while I was there, engaged with the community quite a bit, and that's for me kind of where my why story happened.
But before you got to that part of the why story, as kids or as young adults, we all say, hey, I wanted to go to the NBA, right?
Yes.
I just thought I know I was that good. I just didn't grow anymore. Things happen. I couldn't help that. But what inspired you to apply to law school? What told you, or what happened to say, I want to be in law, some type of form of way of fashion?
It was not as a kid at all. That was a very adult after undergrad decision. When I was growing up, I actually wanted to be a teacher.
Okay.
I tell people I'm an educator by calling and by gifting, and I still teach. I'm an adjunct professor at Vanderbilt Law School. I teach Sunday school at my church. I'm always doing teaching and training as a part of what I do. I've done diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and train and facilitate and do CLEs and all those things. But I was going to be a teacher, and I was going to grow up, get my bachelor's, my master's, my EDD, and then I was going to start a school for African-American males. Because as the oldest, I'm the oldest of 4. My sister is almost 16 years younger than I am. But my brothers, we stair step. And I saw how what they experienced in school was very different than what I experienced in school. And I saw that at a young age, the injustice and inequity in our education system. So I thought that was the trajectory I was going on. I met a city attorney in Atlanta who is now running for governor of Georgia when I was in undergrad, and she was the first attorney I'd ever met.
Wow.
Phenomenal woman, obviously. And my thought on what an attorney did was serve the public. That has always been my understanding. I didn't realize that lawyers worked in big firms and made a whole lot of money. Just that wasn't my understanding. The next lawyer that I met after that was the person who I worked for after undergrad, and I was at a human rights nonprofit in Atlanta. And so she was a minister and a lawyer and the executive director of a nonprofit that worked on educating people around human rights
Right.
and the UN treaties.
Right.
And so I'm a woman of God, believe that God gives us direction, gives us purpose. And in that year after undergrad, prayerfully considering,
Right.
went to law school to do international education policy, because I've always believed that people educate their kids, know how to educate their kids.
Right.
And we often go in from a top-down perspective and say, well, I know how to do education, so you should educate this way.
Right.
And it's the same with our criminal justice system.
Right.
People who are most impacted by our criminal justice system often don't have their voices heard and elevated in a way that is authentic, right? So we say we listen to people, but then we really don't. But those are the people whose voices we most need to hear because they have the lived experience.
Right.
And that's part of why I'm running. Like, I
Right.
have the lived experience,
Right.
which we can talk about my story later.
Yeah.
But
But-
that is how I ended up here.
But no, I still think like you still, because especially when you talk about black males in school, a lot of times when you do see those inequities or you don't see that same care and nurture, that's how you get the school to prison pipeline, right? Which directly can be affected in a good or bad way by the DA's office, right?
Absolutely.
Whether it's juvenile or adults, right? Black males, right? But we're gonna get into that for sure. But I just think that's a ironic coincidence in itself. Like, hey, you wanted to start a school specifically with black males, but like, hey, this is still on the back end, right? You don't want to see them on the back end,
Yep.
but like on the back end, if you don't get that right work care in school, it could.
I don't think it's a coincidence at all. I believe that our whole lives prepare us for our purpose. And so having that understanding personally, and
Right.
calling personally, coupled with, having an education background in undergrad, going through law school thinking I'm going to do education and policy, and then coming out and seeing really firsthand as I'm working with clients and their families,
Right.
the impact of failed education systems and the inequities in our education systems and how
Right.
that then has an interplay with our criminal justice system. I don't
Right.
think that was an accident at all, and it makes me really uniquely qualified to do this work.
You just gave me a new question I want to ask because you see this or you notice this or you hear this a lot in some of our top most powerful elected officials in this state specifically, being a godly man or a godly woman, right? Our governor says he's a godly man, a faith-based man, right? Some would argue whose decisions that he's made for this state are not so godly. Some would argue with that. So if elected DA and being a godly woman, how does that play a part in the decisions and the power that you will hold for here in Davidson County in our criminal legal system?
Absolutely. So I'm going to take it back to undergrad to kind of answer that question. The motto for Spelman is our whole school for Christ. But obviously we have people from every walk of life and every background. And while I was there, I was an ambassador, so I gave all the tours.
Right.
And people often ask, well, are you all going to make me try and believe something? Are you going to make me try and live a certain way? And that is not what being a woman of faith is about or what the school is about. So as a woman of faith, I understand that I have to love my neighbor as myself, right? And I think the saying is justice is love in public, and forgive me if I'm stating that wrong, but we walk out the tenets of our faith, the faith, hope, love, right? All those fruits of the Holy Spirit that we learn about in the Bible. If you don't live them, if you don't walk them out, then you can say that you're whatever, but it's about your actions and what that looks like in public. So that's what that means to me. It's not to, bear down on somebody and make them try and believe what I believe, but it's
Right.
for me to live out those beliefs each and every day in my work and in my actions.
Actions, I think, is a crucial word. What actions didn't you see in our current DA administration's office that said, "Hey, we need a change"? Davidson County needs somebody like me as DA to implement those changes and implement the actions that are not being implemented in our current DA administration.
Yeah, great question. I went there on the promise of progressive prosecution, thinking we were going to be able to do prosecution differently. I didn't even know our current DA before I interviewed with him. We had maybe met once in passing, but there were people who knew me, knew my practice, knew my care for my clients, who said, you need to apply because this is going to be a good fit for you. In 2017, we had that big uptick in youth violence and juvenile violence. And as I've told you, I taught teen Sunday school, and of those kids who were killed, 5 of them were mine. It wasn't, somebody else's kids down the street or some statistic or just some news story. I knew them. I knew what they wanted to do with their lives. I knew what their hopes were. I knew, so much about their lives and their families. And it was in that year, that straw that broke the camel's back, that I realized that we could do better and we deserve better, and what we were doing was not what was promised. We weren't moving the conversation forward. We weren't proactively implementing programs and principles. We weren't actively reaching out to community, except for to, show up and say, okay, well, we're here for you, but that wasn't really the case. And so what I did, because I'm never one to just be like, oh, there's a problem, let's not fix it.
Right.
We're all about fixing the problems and being solution-oriented, forward-thinking. I presented it to our DA, hour-long presentation, PowerPoint, and everything, and it was based on community-focused engagement, hearing from the community. It was about becoming transparent and accessible to the community we were supposed to serve. It was about elevating the voices of moral authority in our community and saying, such and such is doing this work over here. How do we partner with them? Because we don't have to recreate the wheel. We don't have to be in control of everything. We have to identify the resources, identify the partners, and work together to come up with solutions. And it was rejected. It was rejected because we didn't have enough money to do it. Right? And so the things that I was saying need to be done didn't require resources from the district attorney's office. It required working in community to identify our collective resources so that we could build a safer and stronger Nashville. And it was at that point that I started asking around and saying, how do we do this?
Right.
How can I be this person? Because this is what we have to do for the sake of our kids, for the sake of our family, for the sake of our communities. Because what we were doing and what we still are doing is not working for any of us.
Youth is a big thing, right? The youth
Huge.
is our future, right?
Absolutely.
We like to use that term a lot. However, sometimes our criminal legal system don't treat our youth as if they are the future, right?
Yep.
If elected DA, right? How would you navigate juvenile justice, right? Around wraparound services, around restorative justice, and kind of going back to what you said earlier, like making sure like I don't see you again, right? Or you don't have to be here again in any type of way, form, or fashion. Here in Nashville and Davidson County, and I love what our current juvenile court judge Sheila Calloway said. It was like, arresting youth is not the answer, right? And so, if elected DA, what is your answer to juvenile justice here in Nashville, other than just, hey, we're gonna just throw the book at them and lock them up and, lock them back up if they come around again and don't give those wraparound services, which you mentioned in your policy document.
Yeah. So when you're saying, lock them up, throw away the key, you're talking punishment.
You're right, exactly.
And taking a step back from just juveniles, the question we have to ask for every case is accountability. So it's not just how do we punish a person because they've done something, it's how do we hold them accountable and work towards them never doing that again, because that's what accountability is. If I take responsibility for something,
exactly,
I've accepted my mistakes and I'm not going to do it again. But we do that for the sake of the victims and the defendants and the community as a whole.
Right.
So going back to your specific question, though, Judge Calloway is phenomenal. Love her. She's amazing. I think what she is doing in juvenile court is exactly what we have to do, expand, and replicate for adults. And so I'm hoping she will be fully funded in all of her efforts moving forward so that she can really treat the child and the child as a part of a unit, right? We cannot see children as the only actor in an incident, because if I have a 14-year-old who's committing some violent crime, I have to look and see how we as adults in a community have failed that child. Because there's nothing about a 14-year-old that says that's what I really want to be doing, or I have a full understanding of the choices that I'm making in this moment. We know that when people, folks come in contact with the criminal justice system between that 14 and 25 age range, they're more likely to stay in the system. And so if we can really address the needs of people, youth, young adults, as they're coming in contact with the criminal justice system, identify the root cause, right? Identify whatever trauma they may have experienced, right? Identify the needs and the resources that they lack, and address those. Then we're less likely to see them again. And we also help heal their family unit, make them whole. We help heal our community. We make sure that they're not people being victimized over and over.
Right.
So yeah, I agree with what Judge Calloway is doing. I think we have to expand the restorative justice program. I know there's work happening in juvenile court in that way. I think we have to expand our restorative justice program into adult courts, and what that looks like for me is a neighborhood courts model. But I also think we have to make restoration and rehabilitation and restorative justice the ethos.
Right.
It can't just be, okay, well, I have a case, so maybe I'll divert it. It's asking that question for every case. What is accountability? What does harm reduction and healing look like?
And what I looked at your policy book, and I would encourage people to definitely go read it to understand more of what Danielle's platform is. One of the things I seen that I really liked, and I guess it was kind of new to me, right, is one of the things you wanted to do is support the efforts to increase the age of juvenile sealings from 18 to 25, right? What would that do? What does that mean? And the impact that would have for essentially, like, even though you're 18, you're an adult, right? You're legally an adult. You're a young adult, and
you're legally an adult.
You're legally an adult, but that 18 to 25, right, is an important age where we still make some unadultish decisions, and still very young and naive and make mistakes. So,
the reason we do it is because our prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. Our brain science tells us that our decision-making capabilities are not fully formed at 18, at 19, at 20.
Right.
And if we try and treat people in a way that if we try and treat an 18-year-old the way we treat a 30-year-old, we're doing a disservice to that individual, right? We have to put people first and understand the people in the stages that they are in.
Right.
So what that looks like for me, that 18 to 25, is a very specific focus on diverting them and supporting them and addressing their needs in partnership with community organizations, right? When we talk 18 to 25, I tell people, I just want you to remember the dumbest thing you did in college, if you went to college.
Yeah.
Folks got stories. We don't need to say them. Some of them are illegal.
Right, for sure.
They just didn't get caught.
Growth is amazing.
Oh, yes, for the growth, right? So you look back on that time, but so often in the positions of power and the positions of prosecution and from the judges' perspectives, they're looking at that person because they are now in the adult system as adults. But if we could just keep people keeping people's minds how they were and the decisions they were making, maybe we can show more care, show more concern for those people. But I do think it is a focus on 18 to 25-year-olds. I know Judge Bell has a diversionary court for 18 to 30, so I think we need to either expand or rework that so that we are treating youth as youth.
Right.
Yeah.
Policing, right? Another hot topic around the country, I would say, maybe even around the world, right? One of the words that come up around policing recently is defund the police. What are your thoughts about that, and what does that mean to you from your perspective?
Yeah, so I have friends who are abolitionists, and I tell folks I am not there, right? That is not my stance on police. But I think the conversation is, what do we want officers to really be doing, and what do we want to fund as a community? And so I give the example, if a crime happens and it requires fingerprinting and collection of evidence, I need a highly trained group of individuals to do that. Otherwise, I cannot use any of it as evidence in court to pursue justice for a victim, right? So I need officers to do that, but I don't need 3 agencies to show up on I-65 and kill a man.
Right.
I don't need you to show up to a mental health crisis like that. And so to me, that's what this conversation is how do we want to allocate community funds, right, or taxpayer dollars of community funds to the police force as a tool for public safety.
Right.
And so public safety, I think we need to broaden out our conversation to consider tools of public safety.
Right.
Public safety, I think, can be accomplished in many ways by investment in people, right? Crime is a resource problem. Was said recently at a council meeting by Councilwoman Hurt. And we know that. Crime is a resource problem. And so how are we investing our resources? What tools are we using to further public safety as a collective? And I think it's important to recognize that the work that officers do, right? I've had crazy cases on both defense side and prosecution side, traumatic cases where officers are the first ones on the scene to show up, the first ones to see gruesome situations. And then our expectation of police is you go back out and you deal with the next case.
Right.
And that's problematic as well, right? So respecting the work of that people are doing, the good work people are doing, but at the same time, knowing that there are historic and systemic injustices with policing overall. So I think what people miss, maybe the way to say this is, people miss the individual, miss the separation of individual from system.
Right.
So we have to make sure that we are addressing the systemic injustices of policing, but we have to respect individuals in the work that they do. And I think there's a balance there that has to be struck.
Yeah, and I try to make sure I also articulate that balance. I don't believe personally that all police officers are bad officers. The system itself is different, right? And there's officers that perpetuate some of the negative impact that the system puts out there. But I don't believe our officers are bad, but it is a systemic issue more than a personal, individual police officer issue.
Absolutely.
And I think that it help if more people communicated that way. Even when speaking to officers, like, hey, I'm not mad at you, but the system that you're working for is what I'm upset about, and let's have a conversation about that.
And recognizing the generational trauma of that system. So part of my personal story is my grandfather was beaten by police. My father was harassed by police. And one evening when I was a defense attorney, my brothers are driving down Clarksville Highway, headlight out, right? Should have gotten the headlight fixed, recognize that. Officers follow them, and instead of stopping on a dark road and that area was particularly dark. They drove less than a mile, got to the bottom of the driveway, and called their attorney's sister on the way to make sure there was at least a witness should anything happen.
Right.
And so we have to look at how that has impacted
Right.
the system of policing has impacted generations.
For sure.
And not try and make that some pithy, well, that was then, this is now. No, it's not.
Right.
That's very much a real and lived experience, and it is, if we don't address it, it is
Right.
detrimental to the community, it's detrimental to officers,
Right.
And it will not help us move the conversation forward if we just ignore it.
You brought up a situation on I-65 that just recently happened here in Nashville that led to the death of a man who was suffering from a mental health crisis. If elected DA, how do you plan to handle a fatal use of force accident by police? And I'm a purpose it with, a lot of times from a community standpoint, it seems like police get a different type of privilege in the courtroom that everyday community members don't get. And so how do you be more transparent about their process and I guess equitable, make sure it's an equitable process regardless of the uniform that whether I'm a janitor, nurse, school teacher, or police officer, have one going into a courtroom as you as DA?
Yeah. So I think everyone has to be accountable for their actions. And I've told officers that there is nobody who is an exception to the law. But I will say their job often brings them in contact with situations where there is additional, or there may be force used against them. I think we take it a case-by-case basis. I don't think we insulate officers because they are officers. I think there are some people who would like to see that happen, but we review each situation and treat the case, if the facts support it, as the facts present, right? And we follow the law in that area. Some other things kind of that are moving in Nashville, as you well know, you have a restructuring and addressing of some of these issues internally with the new chief. You have the Community Oversight Board really getting its legs under it. I think despite the issues that it faced to start.
Many struggles.
Many struggles over many generations, actually.
Right.
Not just the most recent iteration. So I absolutely support the work of the Community Oversight Board. And I want to be very careful. The DA does not control police.
Right.
And I think there is a narrative out there that the DA is absolutely responsible for the training and control of officers. The DA's office represents the state of Tennessee, and here in Davidson County, it represents the people of Davidson County. And so the DA's office has to be independent of officers, though there is a partnership and you work together because they are out there and they are the first responders, they are getting the evidence, they are doing the work of addressing the crimes first. It cannot be a one and the same situation. And that's best for not only the office, the DA's office, but it's what's best for the officers. So I think we have to be very careful about the relationship so that people can trust the cases and the outcomes.
Right.
I think what we see in some other offices to maintain that balance is the use of what's called a Brady list. So where you have an officer who is consistently the bad apple, right? Doing bad work. The office takes note so that when we see that person's name come across, you're aware and you dig a little deeper.
Right.
You make sure that you know that there have been some issues in the past. So that's, I think there are things that can maintain the independence of office without damaging the relationship between the office and officers, because there is a bit of a codependence there, but without damaging the community that office is meant to serve, which is what's most important in this conversation.
Jail and prison is pretty overcrowded, right? Especially when it comes to black and brown folks, disproportionately overcrowded. If elected DA for Davidson County, what are some of your goals in reducing the prison population, here in Nashville, Davidson County, but also to be Tennessee? essentially.
In Tennessee, I forget the exact statistic. I should have looked this up before I came. But Tennessee imprisons more people than many Western nations.
Yeah.
Right.
We're
It's like number 8 or something.
Yeah.
In the world. Just let that sink in
Right.
the world.
Well, that tends to happen when you have like a zip code that has like the highest incarceration rate,
37208.
You're right. So
and I grew up between 37208 and 37218. So this is very much a part of my life.
Right.
The best answer to keeping people out of jail is diverting them from the criminal justice system in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so what that looks like in my policy platform is, of course, the use of neighborhood courts, right, where you're elevating the voices of moral authority in the community. And we've seen it work in other cities. There's lots of models out there that are very effective. So keeping people from the traditional criminal justice process
Right.
to actually address the underlying issue and meet the needs of community is hugely important. So through that, we're able to decrease the number of defendants and victims overall. So that is one. But I think we also have to move upstream to prevention and identifying the set of conditions that are more likely to bring people in contact with the criminal justice system. Mm-hmm. The DA cannot fix everything. It's not the role of the district attorney, but I think it is one of the most important roles in changing the policy and narrative around what we are looking to do when we are holding people accountable. So part of my plan is to gather the community stakeholders, to bring the community stakeholders to the table and always have an open door to hear from people, because in doing that, we identify the problems, we identify the resources available to address those problems, and to align those resources to meet the needs of victims, defendants, and the community as a whole. On this campaign trail, I've been so amazed at the work that people are doing, but because criminal justice lives in a silo, often we only stay in our courthouse instead of getting out into community and the neighborhoods that we're supposed to serve. We don't even know of the many, many programs that are out there that are serving people and meeting those resource deficiency needs, right? Housing and food and education and childcare and all of those things. So I think we have to bring the stakeholders to the table, identify and align the resources to address the problems upstream.
Right. I'm trying to look at some stats.
You're
when he was
fine.
talking.
Yeah, I was like, hey, what's that?
I'm trying to look up some stats. But
Well, and I think we don't really have good Nashville stats. And I say that on a couple of levels. Our city has grown exponentially, right? Amazing growth. We grew up here, you and I.
For better or for worse.
For better or for worse. But I think for better, right? Because we have a perspective that others don't have about our city.
Right.
And so we grew up here, and we've seen all these hundreds of people move in every week. And on the backside of that is displacement, right? Increased increased populations of people who are unhoused or experiencing homelessness, food insecurity, which has been an issue in many areas for years, but even more so now. And so we're seeing the backside of that growth, and we have not allocated the resources or identified the resources to address the issues that our own growth has caused. So that's also part of what I really think we need to be doing, what I would like to do by bringing the stakeholders to the table. And on the other side of that, data and transparency. We don't have outcomes in the criminal justice system. And I know that sounds like a very strange statement to make, but we have a lot of inputs. You got your CompStat reports that your officers do. We know arrests. We know where the arrests take place. We know how many cases are going through the system. We have no clue what the outcomes are. By demographic, we have no clue what the outcomes are. By judge, by ADA, which I think is even more important. Because if, as the DA, I don't get to control anybody else. Right? Except for the office and what happens in the office and the policy of the office. But if I have no clue what people are doing in the office, except for go do good work is the marching order. But if I don't know how that good work manifests or whatever, I can't address any of the biases. I can't address any of the disparities. I can't do it because I don't know.
Right.
And so we've got to get to a place where we know when we have those numbers. It's hugely important.
Right.
And then, because my background is in training and education, I believe I'm uniquely equipped to take that data and implement the changes that need to be implemented
Right.
in the office. And I say that not as a, there are really good people in the office doing really good work, the
Right.
best they can, but there's no consistent set of principles, there's no consistent guidance, and we have to have that. We have to shift the culture in the
Right.
office so that it's not toxic, so that people know that they are supported in their work. I think we saw that with Judge Calloway.
Right.
When she came in and she changed the way, she says, in order to take care of the kids, I had to also take care of every person that was coming in contact with the kids.
Right.
It's the same with cases going through the courts. In order to take care of these cases and meet community needs, I've got to take care of the people who are in the office as well and make sure people are functioning within their best skill set.
Another thing that is unique about Nashville is our immigrant and refugee population, right? And their communities, right? And it can be very easy for many Nashvillians to be in our own community bubble because, like, even though we're diverse, I would say we're diversity segregated, right? As DA, that's something you can't be, right? You have to be able to serve the needs of all community members, and specifically in this case, our immigrant and refugees. Many of them have language barriers, which, is a fight for, language justice. Many of them feel the fear of deportation if going to law enforcement or trying to, feel like they've been treated unjustly. But just because of that fear they have and maybe a narrative or a family member experienced something, trying to go to court, trying to reach out to law enforcement, they tend not to do so. If elected DA, how do you plan to build that trust to combat their fear with our immigrant and refugee community where they can be served in a just and equitable way from our criminal legal system?
Absolutely. Great question. There's a couple of answers to that. Right. So there are two hires that I think have to happen immediately. The first is the criminologist, who's a statistician that really deals with all of those inputs and data that I talked about so that we could gather them. The second is an immigration specialist. Because if we're going to talk about expanding options for accountability, we have to understand the interplay of immigration law, which is complex, changes every administration, changes every week sometimes,
right.
And is a very unique area of law that even those of us who are in this criminal law world, we just do not deal with regularly. And when we do, we feel very hamstrung in the options available, along with all of those, all those stereotypes that come with it, right? So immigrant victims are only here so they can get a U visa. That's why they're bringing charges, right? So we've heard these things in court, and it's horrible and inaccurate. We lack cultural competency generally in the criminal justice system when dealing with immigrant and refugee populations and understanding, gender dynamics. And so we've got to get specific training on those areas. And also, it cannot be incumbent upon the one or two people who are either immigrants or first generation or speak a specific language in the office to handle it. It has to be something that everybody is aware of and moving towards a just resolution that is both accountable within the context of the law and culture. Right? And reduces the harm, the likelihood of it happening again, and fosters, healing in the community. And so those are my, initial thoughts. But it is if we do not intentionally work to address those deficits that you have stated, then we're going to keep having the same issues that we have. And of course, language. My degree in undergrad was Spanish, and so I love language. I think it is beautiful, and we've got to expand the resources to meet the needs of those who speak other languages. And we don't have a lot of court resources, but we have a community of resources. And so if we just tap into those communities, I think we're going to be much better off.
And I'm glad you said that, because there's like a plethora of community organizations that that cater specifically to a particular immigrant community, whether it's Kurdish, whether it's our Asian Indian community, whether it's our Latinx community, Vietnamese, Japanese, Chinese. It's a plethora, right? And they all have like their own community organizations and services trying to help build power in their community. And why shouldn't the DA's office not be tapped into that, or any of our systems be tapped into that if there's a need or a void or something that could better serve their community that they don't particularly have yet.
Absolutely. And in partnership.
Right. And
not
in
a top down, like you're going to do it my way, but what can I learn from you?
Exactly.
Come to the table, have this conversation with me so we can all be better off together.
Right. I said this earlier. The DA is a very powerful position. I believe the most powerful person in our criminal legal system. And as you mentioned, maybe don't control all of the facets like policing and other things in our legal system or in things that have residual effects that happen in our legal system, but have a very powerful voice and influence, right? There are a lot of systemic issues, barriers, racially issues in our criminal legal system, historically and currently. As a black woman, right, which is a different experience than even a black man, right? And if elected, you would be the first woman, the first black woman, first black person, many firsts.
Since Andrew Jackson.
Yeah. Since Andrew Jackson. As DA for Davidson County, how can you use all of those many firsts and facets to really speak out and address things that you personally can't change, but you can address them, and they will come with a lot of weight if you address the systemic issues in our criminal legal system. If you address maybe a tool that wants to be implemented that has systemic issues or not equitable, is going to affect other communities differently, right? How do you plan on using your voice in that way? Because I don't know we see it a lot or as much as we should too, or people just calling it out, right? Because relationships and things like that could be a part of it. But how do you plan on using your voice and your power to call those things out? Whether it's at General Assembly, the state legislature, like there will be many opportunities, right, for you to call those things out. Do you plan on calling those things out? How do you plan on doing that, right? And let's get that on the record.
On the record, yes. On the record, yes. I think that is one of the things that makes me so different from my opponents. Not just that I am black and that I am woman, but my lived experience informs my decision making. And so, I told you my wife's story. We lost my babies, my Sunday school babies. My father-in-law, who was a Venezuelan immigrant, was murdered 6 months after we got married. And what the officers said to us in their investigation with a very blurry video is, well, we think it was a 5'10" African-American male. Well, it happened on Nolensville Road, and my complexion on Nolensville Road could be anybody from anywhere. And so that tells me, because I know, because I'm aware of our diversity, because I'm aware of our communities, that there may be a flaw there, and that's something that I understand.
Right.
Like I told you the story of my father and my grandfather and my brothers, that's a lived experience of being, so I have this lived experience of being both victim of systemic injustice as well as a victim of crime, and that is different from my opponents.
Right.
I've worked in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space throughout my legal career in different facets, and so I understand what it is to be the only one in a room, to have to be the voice, and it's something I've always taken on. In law school, there were 8 Black students in my class of 270, and I was president of our BALSA chapter and of the National BALSA, which is Black Law Students Association. And was awarded for building a community and engaging our alumni community to meet the needs of the students there.
Right.
And so I've always been about being that voice for our community, but as the district attorney, I cannot be the only voice. And what is important to me is to elevate the voices of moral authority in our community, to hear from community, and as we started out, to go to those who have been most impacted by those systemic issues of racism, sexism, homophobia, right? All of them, and pull those voices in and pull those people in to help change the way we do criminal justice, to reimagine our criminal justice system. Because I don't have all the answers. No one person has all the answers, but together we can come up with answers and solutions to fix the problems that we're facing.
Our council members, and this is going to your power, your voice. Our council members here in Davidson County, Nashville, just the majority of them just voted to implement license plate readers, LPRs, for a 6-month pilot here in Nashville. There were around 15 to 20 organizations, including the COB, Community Oversight Board, that strongly suggested our council members do not implement this bill yet. This tool didn't have enough guardrails around it and maybe disproportionately affecting people of color more than others, especially how our streets and demographic is made up, where those LPRs be posted. What are your thoughts on LPRs? Let me get that first. Yeah, what are your thoughts on LPRs? Let me get that.
I was like, look, we can talk about the council meeting that I was watching. And we
what are your thoughts on that tool, right?
Yeah. So I think you've said the word that is most important here. LPRs are a tool for public safety. That's how they're being labeled and used. And so I think the question is, what tools do we want as a community to help ensure public safety? I cannot say that the bill written as it is now is the best tool. And I think there's also a very dangerous narrative coming out that if you're anti-LPR, then you are anti-police. And that is not the same conversation.
Okay, I'm going to pause you right there.
Okay.
And I think you worded that perfectly, as written, right? Because I think that's what all those organizations and things say, hey, as it is now, like we don't think this is ready to go, right? If elected DA, and let's say if you was the DA at that current moment, right? How would you have used your voice in that particular situation? Because again, I think if our DA comes out and says something about that, I think that changes the outcome of that bill.
Yeah. I think I say just what I said to you now, which is, as written, this tool has too many potential downfalls that outweigh the potential benefits. And I think it was Councilman Sledge who said it, and it really hit home for me. So like I said, my father-in-law immigrated from Venezuela, and there was some issue in my husband's youth, and he told me about this when we were dating, and where my father-in-law was taken to Louisiana. And so I think Councilman Sledge said, if it's going to impact one family where they have a family member ripped out of their home in the middle of the night and their lives changed forever. And that hit home for me because my husband told the story of he and his brother and his mother driving through the night to Louisiana to testify on his father's behalf so that he could stay here.
Wow.
And he was able to stay here before he was murdered. He was a great guy, made the best arepas ever. We had so much fun together. But that hit home for me. If we have a tool that will cause more harm to families and specific populations, then we need to be more careful in our implementation of the tool. So, and in all these conversations, I'm reminded of, I think it's called the law of the instrument or law of the hammer, in that if the only tool you have in your toolbox is a hammer, then you tend to see every problem as a nail. And so we've got to expand our toolbox. We've got to expand our toolbox beyond the traditional, beyond the status quo, beyond the normal, to see that we can implement different tools to foster and ensure public safety. Even the role of the DA, the criminal justice system, is a tool in a larger conversation about public safety. We know that criminal behavior is often trauma response. Poverty is trauma. And so if we are addressing poverty or other conditions that bring people in contact or make it more likely that they participate in criminal behavior, then we are fostering community safety and public safety without your traditional tool of a criminal justice system or criminal justice process through the courts. So that really, we need to expand our conversation. We've got to come from behind our battle lines. I think that's what I saw in the conversation with in the debate with the councils. People got behind their lines and weren't hearing each other, hearing the hurt, hearing the potential for harm that was there, but also hearing the deep desire to create a safer city for all of us, or the fears that people are experiencing regarding being safe in our city. And so we've got to get from behind our battle lines and come to the table and really have these conversations together in a way that is solutions focused and forward focusing, keeping in mind that we want to reduce harm to community, reduce harm to people.
So during our conversation, I've been saying criminal legal system. You've been saying criminal justice system. Some people say criminal punishment system. So what does justice look like to you? And what is justice to you?
I love that question. I have a 6-year-old.
Okay.
And we were driving down Bartlett Parkway going somewhere, and he is full throttle on this campaign, right? My baby goes with me to different places. And he pipes up from the back seat one day and he says, "Mommy, why is justice so important to you?" And my heart fluttered, first and foremost, that he would see it and know that that is what we're working towards. But justice is, to me, a community that is whole, right? A community that is healed. And even when harm happens, right, where there is criminal behavior that takes place, there is a system in place that holds accountable, that prevents that from happening again. And not just because somebody got thrown in jail, but truly because we worked through whatever that issue was.
Right.
People are not afraid, right? People experience support. People experience healing. That is what our justice system should look like, and what being just is to me. Like the quote I said earlier, that I'm probably paraphrasing. Justice is love in public, right?
Right.
I know that sounds very touchy-feely, but no. We have to have these really aspirational goals to shoot towards.
Yeah. No, like that's how change is created, right? You got to think of the unthinkable.
To reimagine what people think is impossible, what our status quo has told us for generations is impossible, and that's what I'm trying to do.
What role do you believe the district attorney has in criminal justice reform, reimagining, reconstructing?
It is the most important position in reimagining the criminal justice system. And I say that not to belittle anybody else that is participating in this process. Every case that is charged comes through the office of the district attorney. Some of them go to 1 judge, 2 judge, 3 judge. No judge sees all of the cases, but the DA's office for state level crimes sees every case that is charged. If our community cannot trust that justice will occur, that accountability will happen, then they will be less likely to report. Right? I've heard and seen the frustration of people who are like, I've called and nothing happens. Right? They're less likely to believe that there is accountability. One of the issues with our criminal justice system is that the process of holding somebody accountable is so far removed from the incident that there is no deterrent effect, which is part of what the criminal justice system is for. You're supposed to be able to deter crimes. But if, a case happens and then 2-3 years down the road, maybe something happens in a closed off courtroom, people don't know that there was any deterrence that occurred. So I think the DA is the most important. That role is the most important in changing the way we do criminal justice, because the DA sets the policy internally, should be functioning on principle, particularly through training of the ADAs and holding them accountable. And the DA also has a responsibility of setting the table, because if you're responsible for every case, you should be involved. You should involve the entire community in finding those resources, in determining kind of the direction that we're going. And when we have an effective criminal justice process for cases that are brought to the DA's office, I think we are more likely to be able to address those cases that are unresolved outside of those that have come to the DA's office. I theorize sometimes, because my father-in-law's case is unresolved, I theorize that maybe it was somebody who was concerned about immigration implications. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was somebody who was concerned about their safety and being able to be safe if they reported what they saw, right? I think there's all those things that keep people from assisting the community in pursuing justice, because the system has not proven itself to be trustworthy. Mm. And so restoring trust in the system is very important, and I think that is a responsibility of the district attorney.
8 years is a long time.
Oh, yes.
Like,
it's a generation.
You might as well, you might as well say 10. You might as well round it on up.
A good decade.
Right? You might as well round it on up.
Yeah.
What does 8 years, the future of Nashville essentially, right, look like as Danielle Nellis as district attorney here in Nashville?
That's such a good question. And I love that you pointed out that it is 8 years and almost a decade, because in those 8 years, you impact a generation.
Right.
What it looks like for me is informed policy making and program implementation based on principles and in process with community, engaged community. It looks like transparency and being open to the community that we are called to serve, that we are elected to serve. It looks like an office that is not about elevating my personal profile, but elevating those in the community who are doing the work and doing it together, right? We have to do this together. Criminal justice, if we do not make a change at this moment, will become the weak link in our growing city. Businesses consider, is a city safe before they move there? And yes, we have enticed many businesses here to invest in our community, but will that continue if we cannot ensure that the city is safe? It looks like individuals not experiencing fear walking to their car because the city is safe. It looks like a homicide rate that is not tripled in an 8-year period, but has indeed gone down. And there are other factors as to why that has happened, not just the policies of the district attorney. It looks like victims' voices actually being valued and elevated. Right now we tell victims you can have jail, probation, or nothing. And when we ask victims what they really want, they want to make sure it never happens to anybody else. And so we need to expand the options for accountability. We can make sure victims' voices are actually heard. It looks drastically different than what it looks like now. It looks like equitable treatment of people as they're coming in contact with the criminal justice system. It just looks so different than what we are doing right now, because what we're doing right now is what we have done for generations upon generations. And that is the option that's on the ballot on May 3rd and early voting April 13th, is do we want to reimagine our criminal justice system in a way that meets all of our needs, or do we want to keep doing the same thing that we've always done? So,
lastly, which I think is equally as important, anything that we just talked about, is how can people support you?
Yeah.
Right? How can they donate, campaign? We understand, we know that these things takes money. They just don't run off of just air, right? And so how can people, one, reach out to you, find more information about your policy, download your policy book, and like donate anything else that you might want to add, how people can, stay tapped in with you?
Sure. So my website is nellis4nashville.com. That's N as in Nancy, ELLIS 4FOR Nashville.com. So you can donate there. We are accepting all donations up to $1,600 per individual, but we are a people-powered campaign. And so our average donor is less than my opponent's, but we have so many donors and people are invested. So keep investing. There's a sponsor a sign link on there. You all seen the giant signs everywhere.
Right.
So click there. You can sponsor a sign, share. Facebook, Instagram. On Facebook, I am Danielle for DA, Nellis for Nashville on Instagram. Tell your friends. If every person in the city found 5, right? Every person listening found 5 people to tell that we can do criminal justice differently, we can win this election. And I know we're on the right track, and I'm really excited about it.
And I want to just add this in for the city of Nashville, because I do believe, like I know a lot of people get caught up in the federal level elections, but these local elections, to me, are more important and affect us more directly in our everyday lives, right?
Yeah.
And you can reach out and touch our local officials here and see them in the grocery store, X, Y, and Z. And so you can tell them your discernments about whatever they're doing or not doing. But I say that to say, 8 years ago, only 25,000 people for the whole judicial election showed up to vote, right? And we're talking about some of the most powerful decision makers in our city when it comes to the criminal legal system, right? Let's just put that out there. And so I encourage everybody, to get out there, vote, find somebody to vote for, because just 25,000 out of 400, almost 500,000 eligible voters is crazy. And so we have to show up and support and determine what our, criminal legal system will or will not be in the next, almost 10 years. So, Danielle, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your availability to be here doing your campaign run. And thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. And so people, get out there, vote. Go tune in more. Go vote. Go do your research. Go download that policy book. And now we have everything on record to hold Danielle accountable, if elected DA in May. And then we can play all this back and say, hey, Danielle, you said this, and this. And then there you go.
Let's do it.
But also 8 years. It's like, so it ain't like it's 4. It's not like it's 2. Like 8 years.
Right.
So you gotta get it right. We gotta get it right.
We gotta get it right for the sake of our families,
right.
for the sake of our future, for the sake of our city. We have to get this right now.
Yeah, we have to get it right for sure. Again, Danielle, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, till next time.